All right. Hello and welcome to the Imagine Belonging at Work podcast brought to you by Rhodes Perry Consulting. I'm your host, Rhodes Perry. Happy Friday. It's great to have you all here. Now, many folks who listen to this podcast want to listen because they are here to gain the knowledge, skills, and confidence to build a workplace where we feel seen, connected, supported, and we have that sense of pride on the job. And these really are the elements of what it takes to build belonging at work. So to achieve this emotional outcome, right, to feel this sense of belonging, we have to be willing to explore and appreciate other people's worldviews. And this exploration includes getting curious about worldviews of others who may be opposed to our own, especially the values that we might hold closest to our heart. Learning about another person's worldview encourages us to practice Sonder, which is that realization that each random person you pass is living a life as vivid and as complex as your own. And Sonder reminds us that each person's world is filled with their own ambitions, friends, fears, joys, beliefs, and behaviors. And until we really engage in a respectful dialogue with another person, this rich inner world is 100% invisible to us. Now, in our belonging membership community, we have the opportunity to practice the art of Sonder. And when we practice it, it aligns with our community's shared value of seeing the humanity in another person, even when we don't agree with their worldviews. And practicing Sonder helps us hone on one of these peace-building skills that many of us DEIB practitioners have. And that's the ability to understand human behavior, or at least be willing to try to understand it as unpredictable as it can be. And today, I'm really, really fortunate to have the pleasure of learning from Diana Cutaia, founder of Coaching Peace Consulting, who will help us recognize the peace-building skills that we've honed in our own practice. And these skills are essential skills, given the current cultural and political environment that we're living through. Diana founded her practice in 2012 with the goal of creating positive and safe workplace cultures that empower us and members within these organizations to lead with empathy and understanding. Together, our conversation supports DEIB professionals, along with executives and those on their way to joining us. Diana and I will explore the meaning of peace, the power of play to foster genuine connection, and tactical strategies that you can take to help design cultures that feel as if they were built for you. So now the moment that you've been waiting for, Diana, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy that you're here.
I was trying to be really good and stay muted, but Rhodes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, unmute. We want to hear all of your wisdom. We're really happy that you're here. And, to get us started, I kind of want to go into, well, first expressing, my gratitude for your contributions in defining what it takes to practice peace through all of the coaching work that you do in workplaces and schools and communities. And I'm really excited to learn from you, particularly, where it all began, right? And your call to practicing peace. So in a little bit of kind of basic research that I did, you started your company in 2012, and yet 2 decades before, this big decision to start your own business, you had started already exploring the deeper meaning of peace. And I was hoping if you could take us back to that moment of what was going on in your life and why this was such a pivotal moment for you that you remember, that you write about, that you talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to be here. It's really interesting because I was just talking with my team this morning as we were kind of revamping our website, and they were asking me, like, tell us again, like, what's the story of Coaching Peace? And I think some of it goes back to my own childhood, my own experience, a fair amount of trauma growing up in some ways. I also had a fair amount of protective factors that helped mitigate some of that. I was a middle child. I spent a lot of time watching, observing, trying to make sure everybody was okay. Growing up in kind of a space that was chaotic at times, that idea of peace resonated with me a lot. But it wasn't until really the early 2000s that I started to really understand what was going on. it was just after we had invaded Afghanistan, and I was watching how desensitized we had become to being in a conflict, being in a war in some sense. That young men and women and others were going off to fight in some ways, and we were kind of going about our business. I remember sitting in a gym and everybody's on the treadmill and this news all over the TV, and I was like, this is a big deal. Why are we not doing anything? Why are we not worried about this? Why are we not really spending the time, effort, and energy to think about it? And at the time, I thought that peace was just the absence of violence. And violence at the time for me was just direct. It was literal violence. Like, are we, hurting each other in some ways? I spent some time really thinking about that over the course of that time. And it was at a fifth grade girls basketball team that had just kind of all coincided for me. And that sitting down in that fifth grade girls basketball team, I was watching the language that we used and the way we coached. And it was very much about an opponent. And, we were going into enemy territory and we were attacking, and there was an offense and there was a defense. And I was like, oh, we're desensitized to this because we actually coach this. And it was just about sport at the time. And I thought, is there a way potentially to do this differently? And I wanted to do it differently. I just thought we could coach differently in sport and we could create more peace in the world. And that was my very rudimentary way of looking at peace in that sense. We've made a lot of changes over those years, in the last 20 so years, but really in the last 10 years. Number one, we define violence, not just direct violence, but we define it as structural, cultural, systemic, right? That all exists in there. And we define peace not as the absence of violence, but the presence of, empathy, connection, understanding, liberation, repair of harm. All of those things are so deeply embedded in what we identify as peace. And that to me is the work that we do every single day, and that I want to do every single day. I want to find whatever that looks like, that idea of peace in organizations and maybe the world.
I love that. I love that experience of sport, and I can really relate to it. I back in the day I played softball and I remember playing second base in like third grade, right? And I feel that there was this moment where our team was winning and it just didn't feel fun, right? It was just kind of, why is there a winner? Why is there a loser? Like that's kind of where I was at in the process. But I like how your thinking was much deeper, and just the language of really it's in the air, but we're not thinking about how powerful words are. And the work that you do in your practice, right, is both looking at the absence of peace and really kind of looking at the research and everything that's out there around how we talk about violence on so many different levels, and then thinking about what does peace look like on so many different levels, and what are the traits, right? Like what are the behaviors to actually cultivate it? And that's what I'm really excited to dive in on, especially as we think about some of the DEI work that we're doing, really thinking about the vision of what is this all for? Like, where are we going? And so much of what we talk about on the show is that vision of, a belonging society, a belonging community, right? Where those of us most likely to feel or experience exclusion, like we're limiting that, and we're transforming those moments in different ways. So,
Yeah.
You talk about the meaning of peace. So you gave us a couple of like words that are associated with peace. Could you share kind of like your framework when you're engaging with different clients? Like how do you talk about the meaning of peace and why it's so essential to their culture, right? In terms of the engagements that you're doing.
That's a good question, and it kind of makes me think. I don't know if we always or very often talk about peace. We do talk about all the concepts that are deeply embedded in what that is. but and part of that is belonging. And we talk about the idea of like, we don't want anybody to feel like they belong. We want someone to know they belong. We want them to actually belong in that space. But I don't think we actually say to our clients all the time, like, we're achieving this state of peace, because what's very interesting is peace is a scary word. It's
Mm.
a fascinatingly scary word, especially when you're talking about it in the context of sport. Number one, I can't tell you the number of times that we have said, I've said this kind of concept of peace, and people are like, well, that's kind of like not really sport. That's not really what sport is, or people will say, well, that's kind of necessary. Like, peace is just everything's great and we don't think about things, and this idea that peace is kind of threatening. And I was very clear when I named my business that I wanted to kind of take a stand on something. And I remember a friend of mine who was in marketing at the time, at a major corporation, who I had tremendous respect for, and she said to me, "I don't think you should name your business that." And I
Mm.
said, "Why?" And she said, "Because I think you're going to turn some folks off. Like, I think it just seems like too kind of like woo woo, and people aren't going to want to do it." And I was like, "Oh, then I absolutely want to do that, because I want people to know exactly what I'm doing. And I don't want there to be a question um, about it at all." So you're making me think now, like, should we be saying it more? Should we be challenging? I feel like it's there in the name, so it's there all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I get that response in terms of you're doing it and it's out there and ether and really thinking like how do we actually, if we had to define it in kind of a sentence or a few so that people can really understand the approach, like what would that be? I know in my own work, it took like writing a book to then like actually figure out the framework. Do you know what I mean? Like it took like writing some 40,000 words to be like, oh, this is the thing, right? But
Right.
so I get that. And also really like that you did take that stance, much to kind of the the guidance that you were receiving to do otherwise, right? And
Yeah.
you are sending out that signal to people that resonate with it. So you're finding the right people. And I think that that's also really smart. And it can feel scary, right? Because no matter what we're doing, if we have a business, we will attract people to it that really get what we're doing or want to learn it. And certainly, we're not for everybody, right? And so, but in the beginning of an endeavor like that, I can see how that could be a little
Oh,
like taking a risk.
absolutely. I mean, I think starting a business in any way is taking a risk, but putting kind of like your values right out there on what it is even more challenging at times, and kind of puts uh, it puts it out there, and you can't back down from it. And I think that's the thing that is always so important to our work is we tell our uh, clients as well as others, like, we're okay with getting fired if we challenge you to think differently about something. We're okay if we're not the right fit for you because we decided that these are the values that are really important to us, and they don't align with what you want. That's really important to us, and we know we're doing the work when we're always on that cusp. Like, we know we're really doing the work that we need to do, because this is hard. This is not easy by any means. I mean, we're asking people, just as you kind of started this out, we're asking people to see each other as human beings in this complex thing called humanity in some ways, um, and do what we term the right thing, and that's hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great segue for the next question I have for you on this idea of, really challenging kind of where your clients are at right now. And I know that you work with a wide variety of clients, right? So you're working in school districts, you're working in communities, you're working, with major global brands, right? And so on the latter, right, thinking about, a client archetype, right? Like the more starchy places that you might find yourself where people are bringing you in and they're kind of open to what you can do, what you and your team can do. And it's a more buttoned down workplace, right? And in those environments, I know a big part of the work that you do is introducing this concept of play. And my sense of it, I have never seen an engagement of yours, but at least what I can see online, it feels like there's a lot of kinesthetic, like we're going to move or as much as we can and engage with this content, like getting out of kind of just being from the neck up in the work that we do. So in those environments, how is like the initial design of the work that you're doing over time, whatever that looks like in your firm, like how is that initially received from those clients in particular that are somewhat open, but then you kind of introduce, and then we're going to do this thing outside, or we're going to do something really different than any other engagement that you've had. Kind of what's the initial reception and how does that shift over time when people start to trust the process that you're leading?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like getting excited to answer the question because it's beautiful in some ways. We are as adults, we get to a place where we are no longer really allowed to play unless it is in the pursuit of something. So you're allowed to, I would say that sport is just the adultification of play in some ways. Like I can go out and I can run around and I can, hit a tennis ball or shoot a basket or swim or ski or do something. And that's play, but it has to be in the pursuit of something. I'm either, I'm doing something targeted with a goal, and that we don't necessarily allow ourselves to, go out and just play for the sake of play, to just be in community with other people. Oftentimes we have activities that we do and we say that the whole purpose of this activity is a shared experience of play. We might not even debrief it. We might not talk about it. This is an opportunity for you to actually just be in community with someone else doing something that potentially could bring joy, but is a really kind of like just playful shared experience. Oftentimes we use play as a way to get us kind of out of our heads and into our hearts and into our bodies. So like into a space where we're like, oh gosh, I have a feeling. And that feeling is invoking like an actual desire for me to think about things differently, or helping me see the world in a completely different way, helping me see the people I work with differently, helping me see myself differently. And it's just through the very action of that movement, which is so necessary and important because we are full beings, right? We have bodies, and in those bodies, we have a nervous system. We have an entire way of being that doesn't just involve the way we think. And we so often just disconnect those things, and we don't allow that to happen in any way. And we really feel like it's so central and important. It is also fascinating to watch people who come into something and they'll be, buttoned up in physically and emotionally in some ways. And they'll be like, very like, we're going to professionalism. This is what professional looks like. And we'll bring out, like yarn balls or koosh balls, and we'll be doing some type of activity with them. And there is this transformation where you can see their own kind of connection to their youth. You can see that connection to that childlike curiosity that they just don't get to have. I have had so many, and mostly cisgender men, who will say to me after we do something like that, I came in here really thinking that this was just a waste of time. And I had so much cynicism about what was going to happen. And that's the best experience I think I've ever had. And there is like, yes, like from a business standpoint, like beautiful. But from a humanity standpoint, like the idea that you could bring someone joy and create an opportunity where they can feel joy, we have, I'm sure you have in anything that you facilitate, a set of kind of like, we want people to kind of state, what are your outcomes? What do you hope? What does success look like? And oftentimes people will say, fun. I want to have fun. And I always say, I cannot predict fun. I can't mandate fun. I can't make fun a goal. What I can do is create the conditions where we can experience joy. And for me, joy is so much more important than fun, because joy is something you feel inside and it stays with you. Fun is a moment, it's an external thing that happens. And sure, you might remember, but that joy is there. And sometimes that joy isn't, I'm laughing, or, it's just that feeling of like, yes, right? Joy. It's the same kind of like connection around peace, which we feel like is this sense of just unconditional safety. I can just be like, being at peace is the space where I can just be me. I don't worry about anything at all. I just know I'm here and I'm in that space and I can be me and I am valued and appreciated and all of that.
Yes, yes. I think like if you listen to this podcast and come right back to this section, I think you've got some of the framework for the meaning of peace. I'm like, oh, that
Right.
unconditional safety and
Exactly.
yeah, in a space to be yourself. Which, is a challenge in lots of different environments and certainly in the workplace. And so I kind of wanted to move over on that thought, right? Just thinking about the leaders in our space, right? And you're working, your coaching piece, you're working with lots of different people, many of whom are in leadership positions and roles. And you are working at a lot of intersections, right? Again, like you're in school districts, you're kind of working with C-suite executives. And so you're working with like both the future of work, when you're in schools and you're working with younger people, and you are kind of working with those that are creating the conditions for bringing on those future leaders, developing them. And I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on existing leadership development programs in the workplace, right? Based on the young people that you work with, what are some of the gaps right now that you see in these programs that, if you had a magic wand and you could be working with learning and development professionals, you'd kind of say, absolutely, we have to reimagine how we do this. Like what might be one or two really obvious things right now that many of these kind of like very rote leadership development programs kind of are missing, I guess, that you would want to address?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at like the way we train coaches is the same as the way we train leaders in some way, right? The change, and I mean coaches in the sport context, not coaching as like life coaching or executive coaching. I think about it in the context of that we had a very autocratic model of the way in which we lead. I have the knowledge, I have the skills, you have entrusted me with this, now follow me. And I will lead you to where we need to go. And I will also dictate to you the things that you need to do. You have some agency in it, but for the most part, just do what I tell you to do, and we'll get to where we need to go. That's very much also the way coaching has been. That's very much also the way we look at and is necessary within a military context, right? Like this is the way that we lead is through that lens. Leaders are facilitators. True leaders are always looking at as a way to guide folks to the things they need to get to and to build their skills in the process of doing that, right? And that it's not an easy task by any means, because there's a certain level that you have to take your own ego out of it. You have to take your own success out of it, right? Like your own acknowledgement. That's hard for us to do as human beings, for sure. And there is this idea that we lead through kind of one lens. The archetype is like, I am the leader, so you follow me. And there are so many collectivist ways of leading. There are so many different ideas that we don't value, especially in a capitalistic society. Like we don't value those as much and we don't elevate those as much. because we want to get to the outcome the fastest we can, and we don't really care that much about the people in the process. Like those two things are not valued at all. So leadership is not, how do you create an environment and the conditions where people, right, engage in a process that actually supports them and their entire humanness, right? We are, how do you get this outcome using these people? And it is much more of a push than a guide. And I think the leaders that are the strongest in some ways are the leaders that then create that opportunity. They're not the fastest. And I think this generation wants that. They want to be inspired. They want to feel like there's meaning in what they're doing. They want to feel like there's purpose in what they're doing. And they also want to feel like they are engaged in this. You know, it's so interesting because when I'm 50 years old, so in my generation, if you wanted to learn anything, right, you had to put a fair amount of effort into it. You had to go to an encyclopedia, you had to take a class, you had to do something. You had to learn. Learning was harder to do. You either learned in your school or whatever it might be. I didn't have access to information at a whim. Well, this generation does. They have access to information. They know far more at 12 than I even knew. They're coming into the workforce with a ton of knowledge already about things. Now, we can argue whether or not that knowledge is like where they're getting their sources might be challenging at some point. But we can no longer be like, come on in, you know nothing. I know everything, listen to me. Because there is this idea that they kind of want to feel like, include me, inspire me, make me feel like this is valuable, this is important. Let's do this as a team, which I think is so, we don't do that. And why not? Why aren't we doing it? I've seen such success in different models of leadership, and we just don't elevate them. I don't know if I answered your question or just went on.
No, you did. And I think you spoke really well to kind of what younger people crave, what they want, what they're looking for, especially like when they're at that point of kind of just entering into the workplace. And you also kind of touched on the tension point, right? Of just recognizing in the business world, especially kind of in corporate settings where you find yourself doing work, just the speed, the pace of things. Like, if we want to get this results the fastest way possible, we're going to do it in the most kind of directive, kind of hierarchical approach, even if we churn through people. And I guess this is a bigger question, and if you have the like magical answer to this, run with it, but I know that this is, that we're all kind of grappling with this, but how do you handle that objection? When you work with some folks of kind of sharing that vision of like, look, like we have to have an approach of more of a consent-based way of leading, where we invite in, as much kind of feedback and discussion and dialogue, where people feel included, they're shaping kind of the decision, even if I'm ultimately the one who has to make the decision, and that's going to take a lot of time. And the benefit is we have a good process and people feel valued and they're going to stick around for the long haul. So like you and I, like we get like the piece around, just kind of litigation and turnover itself is like a massive savings if you have like a healthy culture. And yet this very instant gratification we have to satisfy our shareholders on a quarterly basis is at least what I see as one of the rubs. And so just welcoming any kind of additional insights on that to handle objections, largely from people that recognize that these programs have to change, or the way that we read has to change to make space for future generations, and still struggles with justifying or making the case to others to make those shifts.
Yeah. I think like if you go back to what I was talking about the idea that we used to believe that leadership was like, I'm pushing you to just get things done. I think one of the things that we talk to folks about is like, if you continue to do that, you will push people out. Eventually, people will find other places that will meet their needs. And we're seeing that more and more, right? The quiet quitting, the walking away from positions, the not putting that effort in, or just leaving. And you eventually will have to change, and you'll be forced to change at that point. And now you won't have the time, the runway, the skill development, the buy-in, all of that. It is not about whether you should or shouldn't. It is about when you will, because this generation will push you to make that change and to do things differently. And I think the companies and the organizations that are there and see that have some forethought to be like, what is the future of work? What is the future of leadership look like? And they can see it, are making those changes now. Those are the ones that contact us. Those are the ones that are like that say, we don't know exactly what it is, but we need to do something different. And if we don't do something different right now, we're going to lose just massive amounts of people. But more than that, we're going to lose that drive that our employees have around the meaning and purpose that this work brings them. And we don't want to do that. That is the amount of apathy that managers come to me and they say, like, I just can't motivate people. It's that's why everyone's saying no one wants to work anymore. It's not that no one wants to work. No one wants to work in the environment and the conditions that we are putting them in. So we need to change that a little bit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean it's a radical change. Sometimes it is, but it means that we have to be responsive, or you're going to end up being reactive, and that reactivity is going to cause you to most likely be not successful.
Yeah. And I really love that distinction of like the difference of, should we change these programs or should we change the way we develop future leaders, to when we will, like, it's a must, and there's good thinking around it. There's folks like yourself, really designing programs for this next generation because you're working with them, so thank you for that response. I think it's helpful. And I think more broadly, I think it's this helpful for those of us kind of doing broader DEI strategies in lots of different ways cascaded throughout an organization, where you do get objections and pushback. And I think the more that we know about, future generations coming into the workplace and their expectations around workplace culture more broadly, it's not a should, right? And so it's more about preparing, and the companies that are ready and want to stick around for the long haul are engaged in doing that work. So I have two more questions for you, and then we'll go into our private Q&A session. And the first is, one of the things that you do well in your practice is designing cultures where it feels like these cultures were custom made for you and for me and for anyone else that's listening, right? And I'm kind of curious, in terms of the intersectional approaches that you take to doing that, to reimagining workplace culture, to really address some of these invisible barriers that I think for many of the most enfranchised leaders in the workplace, they just don't know what so many of us rub up against that creates these moments of exclusion. And I know it's a big question, but just some kind of general approaches when you're kind of first starting to do an engagement and thinking about, okay, how are we designing these cultures for the future, making sure that there's space for enough, like you say, where people just know, like, when I'm here, like, I'm meant to be here, I belong here. Everything that makes me special, all of that lived experience is celebrated and valued, right? And again, it's a big question. No one right answer, just kind of curious about your approach to that.
Yeah, so we look at ourselves as co-creators with any organization. So we have a certain set of knowledge and skills and expertise that we come in with, but you are the expert on your culture and your organization. You know your organization better than us because we haven't been a part of it. We want to know it. We want to be just as much of an expert in your organization as you are. So we spend, when large corporations, and even some nonprofits allow us and afford us the ability, we spend sometimes upwards of 3 to 4 months just getting to know you. So we review your trainings, we review your policies, procedures, rituals, routines, formal, informal. We sometimes, when there are physical places, especially prior to the pandemic, when we were all kind of like in a physical space, we would sometimes just come and sit in your space for an entire day and observe and talk to folks. There are folks that have allowed us to sit in on one-on-one meetings at times and just see the dynamics between managers and those that they lead. We will ask other folks outside of your organization, what's the perception? We'll review as much data. We will take surveys. All of that is really important to us because we want to know you. We want to understand you. We want to be able to make the changes that we can that will actually fit and work with you, as opposed to coming in with some cookie cutter thing that says, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And someone's like, that won't work here. And it won't work because X, Y, and Z. We want to really identify where the gaps are before we start doing our work. So when someone says to us, like, hey, what kind of trainings could you do for us? We'll say, we don't know. I don't know what kind of trainings I can do. Here's some we've done for others, but I don't actually know if that would apply for you because I don't know you yet. And I want to know you. We do a ton of retreats, a lot of offsites, a lot of retreats. And even if I do a retreat and it's the first time I know someone, like I work with this organization, we'll do focus groups with them. We might even do a survey. We'll ask other people. If I'm working with you, I want to know you. I want you to be really like a friend. I want to know you like I'd know a friend in that way. And that's super important to us. So that's how we start everything that we do. We start everything we do like you would start any relationship at all, which is, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, well, that makes a ton of sense. And I was just in a conversation yesterday. It was a talk, and we were kind of like, it's the inverse of what you just shared, kind of client and kind of consulting relationship. And it was more for newer employees starting in kind of an executive position, and kind of that runway. And you said kind of like 3 to 4 months. It's like 4 to 6 months of really getting to know people and kind of really learning about the norms and the values of an organization before trying to transform it or to try to push an agenda forward. It's premature in some ways. So I think that's helpful when we think about kind of this consulting business relationship arrangement that you're talking about. So my last question for you, and then we're going to jump into our private Q&A. This is about just going to the theme of the show. We're imagining belonging, we're imagining the future of work. So I'd love for you just to kind of take a beat and kind of live into this future with us, and really thinking about the impact that coaching piece has had on the future, right? So you're thinking about, I don't know, 20, 30 years from now or more. I'd love for you to give us a glimpse of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling on that kind of full sensory level of how the work that you all are leading at Coaching Piece is contributing to hopefully a transformed world for the positive, for the better for all of us.
Oh, wow. All right, let's do this. I think the first of which is that physical space will be different. The ways in which we engage in physical space as far as work. I really wish we would create, I wish we'd do this in schools too. So I hope that it gets, but I wish that we would actually create space that created more connection with folks, and allowed folks the space that they need to do the work they need. So I envision work having playgrounds. I envision corporate spaces having more kind of like, opportunities to collaborate in space, and for folks to be able to be at home or other places to actually do more of their kind of dedicated work. I want us to like really reimagine the space that we have and the way we use space. They're working from home and working in the office that binary shouldn't be the only two options that we have in the world for how we create workspaces. So I'd love for a really new, universally designed way of, creating space. I would love a space where we actually really understood, again, a physical space, the challenges that those who use mobility devices, or those who have sensory issues. Like, I wish that we would create a kind of universally designed space to ensure that people weren't accommodated, but they were actually felt like you knew they were coming.
Yes.
And that is like the ultimate for me. I envision a space that, or a place in the work environment where we are able to have discourse, we are able to have dialogue, and we respect and honor each other in that, and that we are able to kind of like take moments to think about somebody else's perspective, and challenge their perspectives as well, in a way that we really acknowledge and move forward. And that there is this, we're not so scared of the word love, we're not so scared of the word compassion, and that we allow those two things to coexist within our work environment and space. The last thing is, I think I envision, a place where we truly are kind of, I'm going to say it like, we're invested in each other's liberation. That, like, the idea around creating spaces that are equitable, accessible, the idea that we are repairing harm, that we are acknowledging harm that has been done, is not something that we do because we have to. It is something we do because it's all connected, that we are all invested in each other's success, and that we create these vibrant communities of care so that we can kind of thrive and excel. And yeah, I know that's like creating a utopia of sorts, but it is what helps me sleep at night, thinking that, like, we're gonna work toward that. We're gonna get there at some point.
Yeah, yeah, I love that vision. I think it's beautiful, and I think the more I would let you keep going, because I think the more that we can add to what it is that we're trying to build, the more likely we're actually to get there. So such an important question, and everything that you offered in the response is so helpful for us as we remember why we're doing this work, especially when it's challenging. So I really appreciate you being here today with us, Diana. We're about to go into our private Q&A session now. So for folks that are tuning in live on social media, thank you for watching. Thank you for dreaming with us and imagining belonging. And if you'd like to be a part of future private Q&A sessions with thought leaders like Diana, definitely check out the Belonging Membership Community. Really easy to find, belongingmembershipcommunity.com. All right, thank you so much, and thanks for growing the belonging movement.
Thank you.